I'm really pleased to welcome Jeffrey Tucker back to the show. Jeffrey, thanks for coming on to talk to me again about Bitcoin. We had a lot of fun last time, and I think we've got some more things to talk about.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. You know, the first time you had me, I felt like a little bit of a noob in a way. I feel like I just discovered Bitcoin. I'm still, I was just kind of getting going on the topic. So it was kind of flattering to be invited. Now, what is it, a couple months later or something, I feel like my knowledge is vastly improved. But I think all of us are that way. We learn more every day,
There's definitely a learning curve when it comes to Bitcoin, but I think there are some topics where you go from not knowing hardly anything about it to becoming so interested in it that, within a short amount of time, you know everything about it because you just throw yourself at that particular problem. And that's what happened with me, certainly. And I think that that's true of a lot of people.
This happened to me the other day. There was a fellow from Colorado who's a political activist putting together some big convention on new constitutional amendments he wanted to propose, and he called me up to come speak, and I guess he had a little bit of time, and I had a little bit of time, and inevitably Bitcoin comes up, right? So his first response was that he wasn't interested in it at all. He thought it was a little bit of a crazy scheme, a little too geeky for him. Been systematically avoiding the topic, really. And he said, well, now that I've got you on the phone, can you tell me what the heck this thing is? Well, I got going on it, and within a matter of minutes, I suggested that he download a wallet. I sent him some Bitcoin through the Skype QR, and it changed everything. Within the course of 3 or 4 weeks, I guess it was, he became a writer on the topic, and he had an article the other day that had a huge circulation, and he called Bitcoin the whole key to the country's future and the future of freedom itself. So, this all happened very quickly, and he wrote me a note and said, thanks so much for giving me the tutorial. I didn't know who else to ask, and I've never felt so optimistic about the future.
And you probably learned some stuff from giving that tutorial too. That's what I always find when I'm talking to people, is that when you're talking to people who have no context, a lot of times it forces you to invent context, forces you to invent analogies that make sense to them that otherwise wouldn't have really been something you would have, spent time thinking about from that perspective.
Yeah, that's exactly true. And this is why I never turned down an opportunity to speak about the topic. There was a group of about 15 people that were meeting for a kind of a biweekly session on public affairs in South Carolina, and they invited me to talk to them via Skype. And I did it just because I want to kind of get better at communicating, the ideas and talking. When you're talking about a new money, essentially, and a new payment system, you're talking about something that's essentially gigantic. It's going to affect every area of life, politics and finance and economics. And it's kind of difficult to approach. And everybody you talk to initially sort of incredulous in a way, So they're somewhat skeptical. They're worried about your own credibility. Who is this guy, and why is he trying to sell me on some new software?
Right.
That's the initial impression. So you have to kind of get past that. So far, I've been, rather successful. I think there's a different kind of pitch for every group you talk to. And when I say pitch, I really mean explanation more than anything else. And I'm not talking about, the hoi polloi can't get this. There's a kind of ignorance that's out there in every sector of opinion. Among academics, probably especially people who think they already understand monetary economics, for example, or finance. They don't know. And you have to kind of get them past also that fear of their own lack of knowledge, because some people just want to change the subject because they don't like talking about things they don't know about. This is very common, especially among, the educated classes. You have to kind of figure out ways to get them to recognize that there's things that they need to discover about this new technology.
In this same vein of thinking about things from different ways, one of the things that I asked you about when we first spoke about Bitcoin very briefly, and that has continued to be on my mind, is this idea that a country or countries eventually would move to a either Bitcoin-based currency or a Bitcoin-backed currency. I was thinking about this the other day because, again, I was explaining it to someone who had no context of Bitcoin and was like, I think I've heard of that, but I don't really know anything about it. Let me back up for a second. The euro. The euro is a community currency. It's a currency that multiple, essentially, member countries participate in. And a country like Greece, historically, has not had a great time managing their own money. In fact, they blow it up kind of frequently, right?
Yes.
They joined the euro because it took the power out of their hands. And because of that, it had more credibility than a currency that they would potentially create themselves, because if they just created another one themselves, it's a little bit like Argentina or a South American country that starts over and then 10 years later, bam, you've got another problem again. So the problem with the Greece situation in the euro is that Greece threw in their lot with essentially just a larger organization that had all of the same functional problems that they did in terms of, if something goes wrong, then they're going to destroy the currency in order to try to fix the thing that's wrong. You look at a currency like Bitcoin, if you look at it from that perspective, from taking responsibility and therefore blame away from a local government, it actually serves all of the same function as the euro does in that context, except it doesn't have the problem of having someone at the top of the chain who still can do whatever they want, and it just takes the control away from the local, but it still gives it to some small group of people at sort of the international level. I mean, you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I think it's a mind-blowing scenario in a way. It reminds me, the way you talk about this subject, it reminds me a little bit about the way people would talk about the gold standard, say, in the 1940s and the 1950s, just in the post-war period, or even in the interwar period. There were many advocates of the gold standard who thought it was clearly the most enlightened path forward, and they urged their governments to adopt a really good version of it, not the one we ended up with at Bretton Woods, but a really classical gold standard. And there are still some people around today who talk like this, like Louis Lehrman, and there are many others who imagine that a country would gain great advantages in terms of economic stability and the division of labor and entering into a stable relationship with the global economies. There's so many advantages to the gold standard. In the same way, there are advantages, I think, to Bitcoin, far more, actually. The problem, I think, with the whole scenario is that it kind of depends fundamentally on an enlightened political class. And that is in rather short supply. This has always been the problem with brilliant monetary plans that rely fundamentally on the leadership of a country making the right choice. Quite often, the leadership doesn't have the incentive, actually, to make the right choice. And especially in the case of Bitcoin, this is a currency that is unmanipulatable, uninflatable. I mean, it provides no advantages to the governing elites, probably at all, except for maybe as a path to avoid economic collapse. So if it would be adopted, I think it would have to first come about as a result of an imminent calamity, and secondly, because an enlightened political class, an enlightened statesman class took over the country and the banking system and saw the advantages of Bitcoin and implemented it. And those are kind of two strong contingencies, if you know what I mean. I look at the situation in Argentina, for example, today. Now, this is a country where all the reports indicate the widest current rate of adoption of Bitcoin in daily use. I saw it several months back. We first started seeing apartments and houses, real estate quoted in terms of Bitcoin. Everybody knows about it. Everybody's using it. And things continue to spiral down in Argentina, and Bitcoin adoption is continuing. Now, if you saw some group of really tech-savvy, enlightened statesmen take over Argentina, they move to a Bitcoin economy, that is not an implausible scenario in an ideal world. But I think there would have to be a lot of things in place to make that possible. It certainly could work. What it would do to a nation's fiscal policy, I think it would, in effect, it'd be like imposing a balanced budget amendment that you couldn't violate. I mean, it would be very strict. It would automatically integrate that country into the world's economy. So protectionism and mercantilist policies would be essentially impossible. Capital controls would be impossible. Taxation would have to be extremely low and be based on a voluntary agreement between the citizens and the state. It would change the relationship between the citizen and the government completely.
I think that the Argentina example is an interesting one because they have so much experience with this swapping between various currencies, and they have so much experience with the government acting against so obviously their best interest, you know? So I see that example, and I think that you're right there. But you look at, again, going back to Greece, or really any of the Southern European states that have had such turnover in their political system, you know, where you're talking about multiple governments over the course of just a few years. In a situation like that, I don't know. I mean, it just seems like at some point, if both parties that are elected do functionally the same thing, then people either get it together to, you know, create a new party and elect a new party unless this, I mean, again, it just seems like that's a hard situation to control. But even beyond that, setting aside the governmental concerns, with a gold standard, you would need to have a government sign on. You would need to have your government say, yes, we're going to store this gold. It's going to be here and we're going to back the currency with it, because that's the only really functional way to go about implementing a transactable gold standard backed currency. But with Bitcoin, that's not really true. Instead, you just don't bother backing the currency. And as the citizen, you just start using Bitcoins as as what they are. So just as the euro is like this escape mechanism for countries who have been irresponsible in the past, so is Bitcoin and any cryptocurrency really to a citizen of any country that has been irresponsible in the past by simply allowing them to opt out of the local system and opt into the global system.
Yes, and then you develop parallel standards, right? You'd have the official business transacted within the national currency, and then all the rest of the economic life of the nation conducted within Bitcoin. That's not entirely implausible. It sounds a little crazy to Americans just because we're not used to dealing with multiple currencies, but I can see that happening. So you're suggesting a sort of de facto Bitcoin standard emerges out of people's readiness and willingness to regard Bitcoin as a superior system, and it comes about spontaneously.
I mean, it literally is an opt-in system. So, the difficulty right now is the exchanges. Anywhere you look, there's difficulty with the exchanges, but it seems like the difficulty is there because this is such a problem. Because lacking difficulty there, this is pulling the plug out of the tub. I mean, you just can't stop it once it starts. And especially with this whole trust thing that's going on right now, where even at this current state where all this stuff is happening and all these companies are being built, it's still happening in an environment where nobody knows what the rules are going to be. And so it's happening despite the rules rather than being enabled by the rules.
It's true. And since we last talked, I've had the growing realization that it might already be the case that Bitcoin has emerged as one of, if not the premier global safe haven asset. We don't know that for sure, but we'll find out very quickly in the next currency crisis. We could see the movement to Bitcoin dramatically increase and see another huge run-up in price as people flee government currencies into Bitcoin. Traditionally, this role has been assumed by precious metals, right? People, get into the futures markets and start buying gold. They start buying physical gold. They start investing in mining stocks, all these things. But the problem with gold relative to Bitcoin is its illiquidity as compared with Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin is also a payment system, so the asset you hold becomes tradable instantly and globally. You can't say that about gold. So it's very possible that Bitcoin is in the process of displacing precious metals as the kind of safe haven asset in the face of monetary collapse and upheaval.
Jeffrey, you're putting on a conference in October of this year that I'm actually really happy to be speaking at. Can you tell us a little bit about how you decided to go from, brand new to cryptocurrencies to, holding a conference?
Right. Well, so yes, I developed a sort of insatiable desire for information about it, and I'm very anxious to broaden the discussion out, trying to think about the history of Bitcoin. I mean, initially it was a tiny group that was interested in it, a sort of web-based geek community, high-tech dreamers. But the knowledge has been spinning out gradually into ever more sectors. One of the purposes of this conference is I wanted to bring together monetary experts, economists, technicians who understand code and cryptography with people who are real live Bitcoin merchants and put us all together in the same room. And also people who are interested in the political implications of Bitcoin and put us all together in the same room and talk about the implications that Bitcoin has for the future. And the point is to broaden the discussion, to roll it out among a wider group of people so people can start taking it seriously and find the topic essentially unavoidable. And I'm very excited to see, what happens at this event, because it's a kind of a boutique event as compared to, the Bitcoin 2013 conference. We're giving people a little bit more time to reflect. The reason I did it is that I was frustrated at the absence of this kind of conference. The people who should be talking about this, essentially are not. And I sat there puzzling about this for a few weeks, wondering why. Something, especially because I'm located in the southeast of the United States, and I wondered why there wasn't anything in my neck of the woods. So I just decided just to kind of do it myself. I mean, who's going to stop me? That was sort of my attitude. So, I kind of imagined its existence and talked to you and a few other people, and we all kind of thought, well, why not? We got the URL, we've got the hotel reserved, and we're just going to put it together. It's kind of an act of faith, as any act of entrepreneurship is. That was the basis for it. I felt like there was missing discussion, and there's a lot of people wanting to get together and talk about it. And I'm excited to put together these very interesting group of speakers, all with various levels and differences of their kind of expertise. I've got Stefan Kinsella, who's an attorney who knows all about the history and meaning of legal tender laws, and is going to be giving a paper on that in light of Bitcoin. And we've got BitPay in Atlanta, both Stephen Pear and Tony Gallippi, the top two people at BitPay, are giving papers and discussions. They can share their knowledge. I mean, academics need to talk to merchants. Merchants need to talk to the academics. The code technicians need to get the perspective of the lawyers and vice versa. So the idea is to bring all these people together in one place so we can learn from each other, and so that people who are curious about the whole topic can discover it either for the first time or just upgrade their knowledge. That's the idea of it. The whole topic is immense. It's gigantic, and I'm convinced Bitcoin represents a kind of hinge of history. I'm imagining our children, our grandchildren, are going to be wondering, what were we doing in 2013 when Bitcoin just became kind of part of the public discussion? Were you part of it? Do you remember what was it like back then? So I want to be part of that discussion, and I want to be responsible for advancing that discussion and making it more of a mainstream part of public affairs.
So, you come from the hard money community, and that's an area where when I talk to people who really believe strongly in things like, in bringing back a gold standard, a lot of times they have a lot of problem with Bitcoin or with cryptocurrency concepts in general because it's not a tangible thing. So, I mean, do you think that this is just a knowledge gap primarily, and that once you actually have the opportunity to sit down and explain to them how, yes, it's not actually something you can hold in your hand, but it's almost better than that because it's something that, that lives all of these places on the internet, and it's an ownership-based system in much the same way that gold is? I mean, is that the path forward for getting to people who should be aligned with this and should be really, really interested, but for whatever reason aren't?
To answer your question, let me just back up real quickly here. I was at a conference called Freedom Fest 2 weeks ago. This is an event held in Las Vegas, and it attracted about 2,500 people. It's a kind of hard money community. That's its roots, but it's kind of an ideological conference for a whole wide variety of people who are interested in the topic of human liberty, and in particular, hard money, gold, and human freedom itself. And at any one time, there are 12 different panels going on and that sort of thing. We held a special session on Bitcoin with 4 speakers. I was intrigued. We packed the room. I mean, there was an absolute standing room only. And I asked how many people in the room actually owned Bitcoin, and 2 or 3 hands went up, out of, I don't know how many people were there. Maybe there were 200 people there. Probably 2 or 3 hands went up, So I realized we had a real knowledge gap here. I had a sense that people were really taking in every bit of information and trying to make sense of it. And then at the question and answer period, it was almost a kind of a frenzy, not of opposition, but of just intense curiosity. People have a hard time kind of wrapping their brains around it. And it's not just about Bitcoin. I would say in general, we're 20, 25 years into what I would call the digital age, where this super speedy migration to the cloud has taken over global economic life. And people are still trying to get used to it. What is the meaning of it? Is something like Facebook really valuable? What is YouTube, and what does it matter, and what's its place in our life? Is email really real? And how much has it changed us? What does it mean that we're all hanging around on our smartphones all the time? These are times of enormous upheaval, and people are very confused. I think there's an older generation that worries that this is all just kind of nonsense and actually dangerous, In the same way that maybe 100 years ago, people were concerned that the machine age was going too far. There were people that were plowing their lands still with horses that were concerned about upgrading to these new tractors. What if we run out of gas? How am I going to get it repaired if it falters? Can't you really ultimately rely on a horse in a way you can't rely on petrol? This was the view back then too. So every age has its technological upgrades and also skeptics. Oh, I should also mention too that evening, the John Stossel show, which is a show that's on Fox television, was being held at Freedom Fest, and Stossel invited me on the show. So there I was suddenly in front of 2,500 people speaking, and Stossel specifically asked me on the show whether or not Bitcoin was a sound currency, a viable alternative to government paper money. And, you can imagine I had about, at most, 30 seconds to make my case, So I made it in the strongest possible way. And Stossel asked the audience, how many of you own Bitcoin? And I think maybe a dozen hands went up among 2,500 people.
Right.
I mean, it was extraordinary. This is a hard money crowd. So, we've yet to really penetrate this area at all. And as you say, these people would naturally, you'd think, be our allies. So I made I think, some real inroads that night, and at least legitimizing the thinking about the topic of Bitcoin and drawing attention to its existence as a viable alternative. Now, I hadn't seen the clip, but people who have say that as I was speaking, the camera was panning the audience and showing people's faces, and that people were just thoroughly confused. They had a look of just extreme puzzlement, right. Not smiles, not enthusiasm, but just confusion. It might have been my fault, but I think Bitcoin just startles people. And as you say, their top objection is exactly what you just mentioned, this sort of inchoate sense that Bitcoin isn't real, that it can't actually be safe haven or anything that can be depended upon for the long term. You've got a certain anachronistic feelings that people have towards gold because they can touch it and feel it. Now, the younger generation, they don't have this impulse at all. These are people who live and breathe the digital world all the time. They understand that code is the real deal, that the real activity and dynamism of life is taking place within the cloud, with digital media, and they're looking to a future where this is going to continue to be true. But an older generation just isn't quite ready for it yet, just not used to it yet.
I've got a quote for you here. This is one of my favorite quotes, actually, from Douglas Adams. Anything that is in the world when you're born is normal and ordinary and is just a natural part of the way the world works. Anything that's invented between when you're 15 and 35 is new and exciting and revolutionary, and you can probably get a career doing it. Anything invented after you're 35 is against the natural order of things, and you'll have nothing to do with it.
That's beautiful. When was that written? That is so nice.
Yeah. No, it's that really seems to be the case. There are certainly outliers in this. It's not, I speak to people who are 70, 80 years old and who get it after a reasonably short amount of time and can appreciate why it's something that's important. But then, I try to talk to, someone like my grandfather who's very traditional, and, his response to stories like this, to telling him about things like Bitcoin, is to say, I remember in the 50s when a friend of mine started selling sandwiches to vineyard workers, and, then in a year he was able to buy a house, and then in a year from that he was able to buy a larger business, all resulting from this. It's hard to explain to people who have that base of experience that it's just not like that anymore. That that's an impossible scenario that I can't even envision happening in my wildest dreams for anyone I know.
Right. The way I see it is this, that the most important learning step that anybody could take with Bitcoin is to become an owner. And until that happens, it's always going to be an abstraction. You talk to a lot of people about this subject, and you have, just as I have, learned to detect the difference between people who have owned and played with, bought and sold and traded Bitcoin, and those who are just kind of abstractly curious about the topic. You can almost always tell, where a person is on that range of opinion based on whether they're real owners. So owning Bitcoin is the most important first step. And I would also suggest this. Those of us who kind of write about this topic a lot and think about this topic a lot can continue to maintain a sort of an enlightened enthusiasm for it just simply by using it. There's no time when I don't use Bitcoin when I don't get just a fundamental kick out of it. I always have this physical feeling, like my heart races. I'm seeing visions of the future. I get super excited. I'm blown away by just how fabulous the technology it is, and I step back like a child and go, oh my God, I can't believe I just spent this free market digital currency across geographically non-contingent. I'm able to trade with anybody instantly with this tiny little private wallet that I have. It's such a kick. So if you do that several times a week, you can maintain, I would say, intense curiosity and enthusiasm for it, but also you keep focused on reality. I mean, Bitcoin is a reality. It's a what I would call a physical reality in a digital world. So having that tactile experience with it, I think, is the key to keeping us enlightened, enthusiastic, and comprehending about its implications for the future. When I was in Vegas, there were a handful of Bitcoin experts or enthusiasts there. And of course, we met for lunch, right? It was the most exciting lunch of the entire week because I'm there with these 5 or 6 guys. And we had just this constant animated discussion about Bitcoin. It was so exciting. Somebody brought out their 5 Bitcoin coin that they actually purchased, I think, on eBay. I forget now what the name of those things are. It was so exciting. We all passed it around. I took a picture with my iPhone, posted it on my Facebook. It was a thrilling time. And then at the end of the lunch, the bill came. Well, I didn't have any cash. Somebody threw down the credit card, and I said, look, I'm not going to let you pay for this whole thing. Even for those of us who are living and breathing Bitcoin, it doesn't always occur to us to use it, in daily transactions. So I just suggested, wow, hey, why don't I just pay you in Bitcoin? And he said, what a great idea. So he took out a smartphone, I scanned his QR and shot it to him, and it just dinged his phone. And other people at the table did the same thing. And next thing you know, we're all leaping out of our chairs, giving high fives in the middle of the restaurant, just about how great that experience was. There's something about going through that process of actually using it that keeps us really focused on the difference between the digital age currency of Bitcoin and the anachronistic, silly government paper that we call money every day. And staying focused on that, I think, is going to be the key to marketing it in the future.
So we're pretty much out of time here. Jeffrey, if someone's interested in your writing or if someone is interested in attending the conference in October, what are the URLs that they should visit?
Yes, well, you can just go to cryptocurrencycon.com. And I think Google's been pretty friendly towards that URL, so you could probably just look up Cryptocurrency Conference Atlanta, and then you'll find yourself on our website. And it's a really simple and cool website. It gives all sorts of information about the speakers and the sponsors and how to get your tickets, which you can buy with Bitcoin. The date, again, is October 5th. The place is Atlanta. We're at a really wonderful venue called The 12 right there in Atlanta. I can't wait for it, so hope to see everyone there.
Well, I'll be there, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there as well, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, thanks again for talking with us on Let's Talk Bitcoin. I look forward to speaking with you again.
This interview went so fast. I hope to visit with you again too, Adam. Thank you.
You're listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin, the premier audiocast providing news and insights that cover the rapidly evolving world of digital money. Our twice-weekly shows include analysis of late-breaking news, updates on key technical, business, and regulatory issues, and in-depth interviews with the key people driving the new digital economy. Let's Talk Bitcoin offers sponsors an attractive way to reach a targeted and savvy audience. For more information, email sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com.